while investigating ancient human toe bones, which at the time had nothing to do with shoes. Anthropologist Eric Trink observed something very odd. Human pinky toes and the bones leading up to them abruptly became weaker, smaller, and less robust starting about 40,000 years ago, in contrast to all previous human populations. Toes don't just happen to become weaker at random. There was a shift in the way these particular people used their feet. The most plausible answer turned out to be something that no one would anticipate discovering etched into a fossilized toe bone: footwear. In particular, human toes no longer need to grip, flex, and actively balance the foot, as bare feet traveling on rough, uneven ground necessarily must, because shoes are sufficiently rigid and supportive. To be honest, this is one of the more deliciously bizarre methods used by archaeologists to decipher past behavior, not from discovering a real old shoe lying around. In contrast to bone, those deteriorate fairly immediately. Yet, the human skeleton itself contains second-hand evidence. Let's examine when, why, and how prehistoric people began covering their feet with materials other than, well, feet. Let's start by establishing something crucial. On their own, bare feet may actually accomplish a great deal. And for a vast portion of human history, prehistoric people hunted, ran, and walked across incredibly challenging terrain without wearing any kind of footwear. In contrast to feet that are constantly supported and cushioned by modern shoes, the human foot that is worn without shoes from birth develops significantly thicker, harder skin on the sole, stronger intrinsic foot muscles, and a clearly different, more spread-out toe shape. Measurable changes in foot strength, arch structure, and even walking gait have been routinely reported in studies comparing habitually barefoot and habitually shod populations. Proof that the human foot is a truly functional and versatile biological engineering device in and of itself, completely capable of navigating difficult terrain without the need for any outside assistance, at least in the correct circumstances and with the appropriate level of cumulative lifetime conditioning. Given that naked feet were already functioning very well, what motivated prehistoric people to create shoes in the first place? Climate, topography, and injury risk all play a part in the solution. Three factors that, depending on the precise location of a certain people, sometimes exerted enough pressure to turn footwear into an innovation that was truly important and worthwhile. Since climate is arguably the most obvious and intuitive factor influencing the development of early footwear, let's start there. Bare feet became a truly dangerous hazard as early humans moved into colder climates, especially during glacial eras when temperatures fell sharply over large swaths of Europe and Asia. When bare skin comes into prolonged contact with frozen or nearly frozen ground, the danger of frostbite, a truly life-threatening injury, increases dramatically. And since mobility was closely related to hunting, gathering, avoiding danger, and pretty much every other action necessary to survive, losing effective use of your feet in a setting with no access to contemporary medical assistance was practically a death sentence. Regardless of what was happening with footwear development anywhere else on the planet at the same time, this pressure alone would have created a huge urgent incentive to develop some sort of insulating foot covering specifically for populations pushing into genuinely cold climates. Let's now discuss the genetic evidence, which relates to something genuinely fascinating that has nothing to do with shoes at all, but tells us something crucial about when humans began covering their bodies more generally, which is probably closely related to the timing of footwear as well. Human body lice are a parasite that has evolved to dwell in garments rather than directly on skin or in head hair. Researchers examining the evolutionary history of these parasites discovered that, approximately 170,000 years ago, body lice and head lice underwent genetic divergence. This genetic divergence timeline strongly suggests that humans began wearing body-covering clothing much earlier than many other lines of physical evidence had previously suggested. This is because body lice specifically require clothing to survive, existing in the fibers of worn garments rather than directly on the human body. Even though the specific evidence for early footwear itself is still much more difficult to pin down directly, it is a reasonable and well-supported inference that a species that was already developing body coverings to deal with cold climates and environmental protection was probably applying at least some version of that same basic insulating logic to their feet as well. Now, Let's refocus on the toe bone evidence because, considering how truly ingenious this entire line of evidence is, Trinkus research merits a closer, more thorough examination. Researchers found that the robustness and structural integrity of the smaller toes had changed. This alteration was especially apparent in some groups beginning about 40,000 years ago, during the Upper Paleolithic period. The toes, especially the smaller ones, must actively engage, grip, and aid stabilize balance with each step when barefoot walking on natural, uneven, and unexpected ground. Over the course of a lifetime, consistent, low-intensity exercise strengthens and preserves toe bone structure. That continuous toe engagement exercise essentially ends once a foot is contained in a sufficiently stiff supportive shoe that provides structural stability that the foot no longer has to produce on its own. Additionally, over a sufficient number of generations, this decreased mechanical demand manifests as quantifiably lower bone resilience in the precise toes where researchers discovered weakening during this particular time frame. Since it doesn't even require the discovery of a surviving shoe, this is truly one of the most elegant examples of indirect archaeological evidence in the entire discipline. Under typical preservation conditions, shoes made of leather, woven plant fiber, or hide almost never make it to 40,000 years intact. Rather, the impact of the shoe was shown to be actually embedded in human bone structure, allowing us to estimate a significant time frame of footwear even in the lack of any physical shoe remnants from that particular early period. Let's now introduce the oldest tangible shoes that have been found. Because, if preservation conditions cooperated, they offered genuinely concrete, indisputable physical confirmation of precisely what kind of footwear ancient humans were actually creating, even though they are significantly younger than that 40,000-year toe bone evidence. A pair of braided sagebrush bark sandals found in Oregon's Fort Rock Cave is the oldest known surviving footwear, and it is thought to be roughly 10,000 years old. The cave's exceptionally dry environment prevented the kind of organic degradation that virtually everywhere else on Earth kills this kind of material, which is why it was preserved. These sandals displayed incredibly intricate weaving methods. Several layers are purposefully arranged to ensure longevity and a snug fit, proving that, by this time in human history, the making of shoes had evolved from a crude last-minute improvisation to a truly refined, technically proficient art. The Arini 1 shoe, which was found in an Armenian cave and is estimated to be 5,500 years old, is even more amazing. This shoe has truly remarkable workmanship and is currently acknowledged as the oldest known surviving leather shoe in the world. One piece of leather that had been specially stitched and formed to fit the wearer's foot was discovered filled with grass, probably for insulation or just to keep the shoe in place while being stored. Although it's not the most glamorous preservation technique archaeology has ever discovered, the combination of extremely dry cave conditions and a thick layer of sheep dung that had accumulated over the shoe over millennia was responsible for the remarkable preservation, providing researchers with a truly complete, wearable example of sophisticated ancient footwear construction. Let's also address the truly amazing evidence of Ice Age footwear discovered in Russia, which clearly relates to the cold climate pressure we previously described as one of the main factors influencing the evolution of early shoes. When investigating burial sites in Sunar, Russia, that date back around 30,000 years, researchers discovered foot bone arrangements and related artifacts in burial contexts that suggested the deceased had been buried with some kind of soft-fitting footwear. This evidence fits remarkably well with the timeline suggested by the toe bone research we discussed earlier, even though the actual organic shoe material itself had long since decomposed. This suggests that by this particular period in human prehistory, footwear use was already becoming genuinely established, at least within specific cold climate populations. Let's now discuss Yudi the Iceman, as this case offers one of the best preserved views into the actual fabrication of ancient footwear found anywhere in the archaeological record. Wenutsi, a stunningly well-preserved mummified body from around 5,300 years ago, was found frozen in the Alps. It was wearing truly elegant shoes. Shoes with a woven bark netting construction, deer hide for the side panels, and bear skin for the sole. Each is filled with soft, insulating grass that has been placed in a way that maximizes the preservation of warmth. essentially serving as an integrated, antiquated sock that is integrated into the entire design of the shoe. This degree of multi-material construction blends many materials that have been carefully selected for their unique mechanical and insulating qualities. Sturdy leather for the external framework. Soft grass insulation for warmth is an example of truly advanced practical engineering knowledge, specifically honed through what must have been generations of accumulated trial and error regarding the precise combination of available materials that kept feet warmest and most protected during challenging alpine travel. Let's discuss a truly significant aspect of regional differences in early footwear design. Because there was never a single, common ancient shoe design that was used everywhere, as we've covered in earlier movies on ancient clothing and shelter. The development of footwear was strongly correlated with the local environment, the materials that were accessible, and the unique obstacles that local populations encountered. People living in much warmer, drier areas often created more basic sandal-style shoes that were mainly intended to shield the foot sole from jagged rocks, hot sand, or uneven terrain without requiring the kind of complete insulation that is necessary for cold conditions. Populations in harsher, colder climates evolved far more enclosed, insulated designs that resembled what is today known as a boot or moccasin, putting complete foot coverage and warmth retention ahead of the simpler, less effective protection that a standard sandal offers. In fact, this regional difference reveals something very significant about the evolution of footwear technology throughout human history. More generally, it wasn't a single invention that proliferated from a single place of origin. It represented several regional solutions that were independently created, each one especially tailored to the real-world requirements of that specific area. Almost every single ancient technology we've discussed in this series has shown the same general pattern. Beyond the cold temperature driver we've previously covered in detail, let's explore something really intriguing that relates this whole subject to topography and injury risk in particular. Certain terrain types, jagged volcanic rock, prickly scrubland, and settings with a genuinely high concentration of deadly venomous ground-dwelling critters presented a significant damage risk for bare feet that basic footwear might significantly minimize, even in significantly warmer regions. In any setting without access to modern medical care, a serious foot injury, deep cut, puncture wound, or infection after an injury constituted a genuinely serious threat because mobility loss directly threatened a person's ability to hunt, gather, or simply keep up with their group during travel. This need to minimize injuries probably served as a significant secondary motivator for the development of footwear in many populations living in warmer climates. Entirely distinct from, and in addition to the cold weather insulating demand that dominated the development of footwear, particularly in colder climates. Now, this is a really intriguing subject that deserves direct attention. Why didn't every member of the ancient human population promptly and universally embrace footwear as soon as the fundamental idea became available if it offered all these real practical advantages, such as warmth and injury protection? The candid response relates to a topic we've covered in a number of earlier movies about the wider acceptance of antiquated technologies. Like almost every other ancient invention, footwear had real costs and trade-offs that had to be balanced against its unique practical advantages in the unique settings of each population. Time, expertise, and material resources that could be used for other survival concerns were needed to build sturdy, well-fitting shoes. Furthermore, the practical case for devoting that time and resources to the creation of footwear wasn't nearly as strong for populations dealing with truly harsh cold or hazardous terrain conditions as it was in genuinely warm, relatively hazard-free environments where bare feet performed flawlessly without significant injury or temperature risk. In fact, this clarifies something that occasionally perplexes those who examine the larger historical and ethnographic record. Long until relatively recent times, many traditional societies in a variety of warm temperature regions continued to live mostly or completely barefoot, not because they lacked the technical skills or expertise needed to make shoes. When complex footwear was truly required for particular circumstances, several of these same societies clearly possessed the requisite craft skills and material access. However, this was due to the fact that their particular local environment did not constantly produce the same strong, long-lasting practical pressure favoring habitual footwear use that was consistently produced in colder, more dangerous areas elsewhere. Since this relates directly to the initial toe bone research that we began this entire movie with, let's also discuss something truly amazing that links this entire topic to the contemporary barefoot and minimalist footwear trend. Some modern researchers and athletes have questioned whether some aspects of modern heavily cushioned and structured footwear may actually be undermining some of the foot's natural strength and biomechanical capability over a lifetime of use, citing evidence of ancient barefoot biomechanics. The stronger foot muscles, the different gait pattern, and the more spread, naturally functional toe structure typical of habitually barefoot populations. This is a genuinely fascinating modern echo of the same fundamental trade-off that ancient humans were navigating tens of thousands of years ago, weighing the true protective and insulating benefits footwear provides against the loss of certain natural foot strength and functional capability that comes from the constant external support footwear necessarily provides. However, this is still a genuinely active, sometimes contentious area of ongoing biomechanical research rather than a fully settled scientific conclusion. The timeline we've been talking about throughout this entire video coincides remarkably well with a particularly important period in human history. So there's also a genuinely intriguing angle worth bringing into this discussion about how footwear relates to more general questions of human migration and geographic expansion. According to toe bone evidence, the roughly 40,000-year mark coincides with the overall time when Homo sapiens populations were aggressively expanding into far colder parts of Europe and Asia. Neanderthals and other cold-adapted human species, which, as we covered in a previous video, had already evolved to these hard conditions for a far longer evolutionary timescale, were the main inhabitants of these areas. This presents an incredibly intriguing prospect that is worth facing head-on. Along with the sewn-fitting clothing technology we've already covered, footwear may have been one of several crucial technological advancements that enabled Homo sapiens to successfully compete with and eventually spread into cold climate regions that other more physically cold-adapted human species had previously held a significant biological advantage in occupying. Instead of treating all ancient shoes as a single, undifferentiated category, let's discuss something truly significant about the particular construction methods that researchers have found across various early footwear traditions. Some early shoe designs were more akin to a basic wrapped foot covering, which was just a piece of woven or hide material tied directly around the foot with cordage. These designs required little in the way of specialist fabrication, but they provided comparatively little longevity or structural support. Other designs, such as the much more sophisticated Arini 1 leather shoe we previously discussed, involved carefully shaped, cut, and stitched leather made to precisely match the contours of a single foot. This represents a truly significant technical leap beyond simple wrapping, requiring real measurement cutting and stitching skill passed down through dedicated craft knowledge rather than simple, improvised one-time construction. Since making well-fitting, long-lasting footwear demands truly specialized tools in and of itself, it's also worth discussing something genuinely fascinating about how footwear building relates to more general tool development. Needles and bone balls for piercing and sewing leather. In order to correctly prepare and thin hide material to the appropriate thickness and flexibility for footwear use, scrapers with specific shapes are used, and more sophisticated cordage-making methods for correctly attaching the final result to the foot. These particular tool types appear and become more sophisticated within about the same general time periods, according to the archaeological record. Evidence from footwear indicates that people were actively creating increasingly complex shoes, supporting the notion that footwear development wasn't a standalone invention. It was intricately linked to a larger, concurrently evolving toolbox of craft technology that prehistoric people were honing as a cohesive whole. Additionally, there is a very intriguing aspect of upkeep and repair that is worth investigating. Because ancient footwear needed constant maintenance and periodic replacement, it introduced a whole new category of regular, repeating craft labor into ancient daily and seasonal living, in contrast to a piece of stone tool technology that would remain indefinitely with minor degradation. Regular usage, especially over harsh terrain or long distances, would have gradually worn down leather and woven plant fiber footwear, necessitating frequent resoling, patching, or eventually full replacement with newly made material. This implies that creating a single, long-lasting solution and solving the issue completely wasn't the only way to achieve successful long-term footwear use. It was a continuing, recurrent practical commitment that required consistent time investment, adequate raw materials, and sustained competence throughout the daily lives of the entire community. The footwear story we've covered throughout this entire video is one of the clearer examples of how multiple completely independent lines of evidence, skeletal biomechanics, parasite genetics, burial context, and eventually direct artifact preservation can be woven together into a single, increasingly confident historical timeline. Even though the actual physical object at the center of the entire question almost never survives long enough to be directly examined. Finally, it's worth discussing how this entire topic connects to something truly worth appreciating about the nature of archaeological detective work in general. Throughout this entire field, the same fundamental detective method, piecing together indirect evidence from several entirely unrelated scientific disciplines, occurs frequently. And it's just this kind of methodical, interdisciplinary scientific research that continuously modifies and improves our comprehension of prehistoric human existence, frequently in ways that the original, simpler physical data by itself could never have shown. When did prehistoric people begin wearing shoes, then? Based on the incredibly brilliant combination of data we've discussed throughout this entire movie, including direct burial context evidence from sites like Sun Here, genetic evidence from body lice divergence timing, and indirect skeletal evidence from altering toe bone form. The earliest physical shoe items that have survived date back only around 10,000 years for the oldest sandal and about 5,500 years for the oldest leather shoe. This suggests that footwear use started at least 40,000 years ago, for the simple reason that under typical environmental circumstances, organic shoe material seldom ever lasts that long. This notable discrepancy between the presumed start date of footwear use and the earliest physical artifacts that have survived serves as a very crucial lesson that permeates almost the whole series. It doesn't follow that ancient conduct didn't exist just because there isn't any concrete physical proof of it. It frequently just indicates that the particular materials used were not strong enough to last the tens of thousands of years that separated that ancient conduct from contemporary archaeological excavation. To be honest, there's something quite rewarding about the solution to this specific puzzle. Not by discovering an exquisitely preserved antique shoe in a museum-ready display case, but by closely examining the subtly accumulating evidence etched right into the structure of human bones. Evidence that remained undiscovered for tens of thousands of years until someone with the necessary knowledge finally considered the possibility that a pinky toe might have subtly begun to weaken. Around the same time, it seems that prehistoric people realized they no longer needed to perform all tasks with their bare feet.